it's not necessarily a bigger issue now. It's just that we talk about it more. That's kind of like a fallback that a lot of people say. Like when I was a kid, this wasn't a thing. Now everyone's depressed. Well, it's not that simple. And the data tells us a very different story. I mean, basically, we have 44% of high school students say they have persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. So it used to be, and that's in 2021. In 2009, so not even that long ago, it was around 26%. So essentially, we're doubling each decade.
Hey, welcome back to Normalize the Conversation. Today, I'm here with someone I absolutely admire, Dr. Natanya Wachtel. She's the co-founder of Evermore, an empathy AI-powered platform that serves as an interactive game theory-powered mental wellness guide that has actually been featured in Netflix, The Social Dilemma, and will also be in the series follow-up, The Changemakers. Dr. Wachtel is also the founder of New Solutions Network, a group of strategic consultancy practices to help life science companies design more strategic and customer-centric solutions, leveraging the intersection of technology and behavioral science. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on today, Natanya. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you really?
I'm great. Thank you. That's quite a big introduction, and the feeling is absolutely mutual. I am so glad to be here speaking with you today, and so excited to just be in your orbit for all the wonderful things that you're doing and all the lives that you're affecting with positive change.
You are so sweet. Since the day we connected, you've actually been one of the most kind-hearted, supportive people that I've ever encountered. So I really want to thank you. And today you sent me over, we actually changed our topic like 10 minutes ago for everyone listening. You sent me over this amazing document full of information to focus on this teen mental health crisis, which I just don't think is a conversation we have enough. People kind of minimize it, right? We talk about how teens are just dramatic, they're hormonal, they're going to outgrow it. We just got to let them act the way they will. And we're not putting enough attention and support toward it. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. I mean, this is the highest level of teenage sadness ever recorded.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of gloom and doom, I guess, to start to set up and frame the problem, because I know your listenerships range between, young people, parents, folks who work in mental health services. So for some of you, this is going to be no surprise. And for some of you, it just reinforces or expands your understanding of what's going on. And maybe for others, it'll actually kind of break a little bit of some of the fallacies or stigma around why things are happening and what's happening. And I think one of the big ones is that it's not necessarily a bigger issue now. It's just that we talk about it more. That's kind of like a fallback that a lot of people say. Like when I was a kid, this wasn't a thing. Now everyone's depressed. Well, it's not that simple. And the data tells us a very different story. I mean, basically, we have 44% of high school students say they have persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. So it used to be, and that's in 2021. In 2009, so not even that long ago, it was around 26%. So essentially, we're doubling each decade. I'm quite concerned that trajectory is going to continue as we go forward. And I think there's maybe a little wake-up call that we're all hopefully going to experience so that we can help try and thwart that curve a little bit. But basically, it's not good and it's not surprising, but it's real. So we talk about things like depression, and that can range from a lot of things to being, withdrawn and isolated to, thoughts of suicide or suicide itself, as unfortunately you're quite aware. So basically we have falling grades, we have less activities in sports, we have less socialization, we have a lot of variables going on. But we have two groups that are sort of the most, I guess, the most affected currently in terms of statistically where their numbers are going up. As most people know, most therapists right now are book solid, right? So we have a lot of need and not a lot of support. Teen girls, unfortunately, and those who identify as LGBTQ, those are on the rise by death and drug overdose. And it's over 100,000 right now for the first time last year, which is just heartbreaking. As a human, as a parent, it's hard for me to even say. So basically, as we're seeing, we're just not able to provide the support in the mental health arena that the young people need. And that's just a fact. And we need to be a little bit more creative about it, how we do this kind of help, how all of us take in the idea of betterment, mental health and wellness. And, it doesn't have to look like traditional therapy either. So we have to kind of think outside the box and use whatever support systems you have.
I also want to add that the overdose rates, we said that it hit over 100,000. For reference, anyone who doesn't know, the average has been about 70,000 before that. So this is a jump of 30,000 overdoses.
Yeah, in a very short amount of time. And that's important to note, right? So the numbers are so significant because it's happening so quickly that if you look at the trend, you could see 10 years from now, we'll be like 50%. That's if you have two children, one of the two children, that's what we're talking about. And that's terrifying to me, but it's also encouraging that we see change and we see people and young people like yourself and others who are able to start to crawl out from this, to find those tools within themselves, within the resources that are available out there. Some of the wonderful things about social media and the internet are the resources that you can get for free or very low cost to help you. And I know that we talked about before the call started, some people listening to this today might not be in the place to sort of pick up and take up all of the things we might suggest or recommend in terms of getting a little bit closer to feeling good or better. But, if you can show up today and listen and take in just a little bit and take one baby step towards shifting your mindset just slightly towards a belief in there is something better for me. That's enough. That's step one. That's day one.
Exactly. And to that point, I know what it's like to be in that place where you're not ready to take that step, where you're terrified, where you don't know if you're worthy or if you deserve it or what's going to happen. What if you fail? And if all you do today is genuinely get out of bed or turn on a podcast or listen to some music that makes you smile for a brief second, if you just do one thing, please celebrate and honor that, because those baby steps help you get to that point where you can shift your mindset into a belief in yourself and in your future and all that you have going for you.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of anybody that you admire, an athlete, a singer, a YouTube star, a TikTok dancer, whatever, anybody of any kind of profession, someone in your family, the things that you admire about them, whether it's their achievements or their talents, even if it feels like it was some natural talent that they came out of the womb doing, that's not how it happened, right? It all comes from these small steps that ultimately build upon each other. It's kind of corny, but it's really true. And at the end of the day, we all have the same kind of equipment. And this equipment is based on electrical signaling. And a way to help guide that signaling towards the positive are these sort of little bits of positivity in some way. And they don't all mean that you're smiling and laughing all day. It can be just exactly what you said, Fran, just a little nudge towards, let me try. It's worth it. It's worth it to try and just do something. And that's okay. And that's okay. Maybe that's something is getting out of the bed or taking a shower that day. Maybe it's calling up a friend. And that's okay. So we all are starting from a different place. The thing that I hope to convey to anyone who is listening is that from the bottom of my heart and soul, and from all of us involved in this project with you, Fran, that you matter. And everyone matters. It's a miracle that we're here. We're basically living on a swirling rock under a fiery sun. And it's a miracle that we even exist, right? So let's take today as a gift if we can. And it's just something that isn't so easy to do all the time. And there's a couple reasons why. And so I wanted to also see if we could talk about some of those reasons that it's so hard and some of the misconceptions that many people, especially some of the older generations, have about why this is happening.
we definitely need to jump into these fallacies and misconceptions because there's so much misinformation out there due to a lack of conversation, a lack of awareness, a lack of education. I mean, from your generation, did you guys ever talk about mental health in school or grow up speaking about mental health?
No, there's quite a stigma. It was really seen as something that's wrong with you and a weakness. I'd say it's also traditionally gendered around the traditional gender norms for male and female in terms of, I think, for young boys and men or those who identified as such, because we didn't actually have a lot of different terminology back then. So I will stay within those sort of traditional labels to say, you're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to have feelings. That's what men and boys were socialized to do. So if they had those concerns or anxious feelings, it was really not okay to express. And that was within your peer group, usually within your family, even within, the opposite gender. So that's something that's gotten a little better, but it's not great. Essentially, sadness and hopelessness have increased for every race, for straight and gay teens, for teens who say they never had sex, for those who said they have. Whether you are, any religion, it's really up. And unfortunately, it's in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And within that, why that is, one of the big fallacies or big areas that some people dismiss these statistics is that they say, well, I think you said it in the beginning, Fran, well, teens are just being teens and they're just being badly and they have to work it out. And the data shows us that's actually kind of, changing. I mean, basically, drinking and driving is actually incredibly down from the 1990s, right? It's almost 50% less than it was in the 1990s, which is when I went to school. So fighting is down up to 50%. And sex under age of 13 is down more than 70%. And bullying is even down. LGBTQ acceptance is actually across the board on average, again, up. So there's actually some of those things there that kind of conflate each other around these excuses. And the second thing is around the sort of dismissing teen angst and moodiness as being just sort of a rite of passage, part of growing up, right? So it's really, that's the thing we were saying before, oh, well, it's just that now people are talking about it or parents are more obsessing over their kids, so they just make a big deal out of nothing. But there are objective measures of anxiety and depression, eating disorders, self-harming behaviors, and suicide. And those are up over the past decade, without a doubt, controlling for, all the other variables we talked about. So, we have a lot more ER visits. We have a lot more, inpatient treatment facility. We have a lot more school absenteeism. That doesn't account for it just being talked about more. Yeah. And essentially the last one is kind of the obvious, but over-indexed thing is COVID. So not just, COVID as a concept, but specifically lockdown and then, sort of the lingering effects. And of course, the loss of life and fear and everything that's changed because of it. Right. So it's sometimes almost like a blanket statement that, oh, it's COVID and it's ruining the kids. Well, it's not that simple, but it's actually multi-layered, but basically we are seeing the data that yes, COVID has indeed exacerbated or made worse teen mental health. And that's actually significantly contributing, but it's not the only factor.
These misconceptions are so common and again, not talked about enough. I mean, I had no idea that school bullying was down. Genuinely no idea, because we talk about the rise in bullying. And where bullying has, I think, risen is social media. And although people are still bullying, it's not where it was, like you said, back in the 90s. So that can't be the only thing we're focused on and saying, well, that's just going to work itself out. Teens being moody, they're going to figure it out. They're going to grow out of it. We can't just say, oh, well, now that COVID's getting to a place where it's over, we're not in lockdowns anymore, that everything's going to be okay. We need to be having these conversations and figure out what is propelling the rates of depression among teens.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of, data today, and this is sort of a compilation with my lens, but, have the data if anyone wants, references and things like that afterwards. But basically, there are sort of 4 key drivers, we think, and all of them in and of themselves are not horrible or the worst or it's all or nothing, but it's important to look at the why and the how each of these drivers may affect you personally or your children if you're a parent, or your patients if you're in mental wellness space, and really what we can do about them. So the obvious one is social media. But again, that analogy about, in doses is really what's important here. So there was some studies that looked at why there was this like monumental rise in incidence in sadness and anxiety in 2012. And what they found was that there was also a correlation that in 2012, there was about a big statistical change in how many young people had smartphones and social media. So it was actually past the 50% mark. So at that point, it's when most, if you will, the majority of young people were on social media. But why? What does it mean? Is it just being there? No, it's basically, it's not like rat poison, which is toxic to everyone. It's sort of this mildly addictive substance, right? It can enhance some social situations, but it can lead to dependency and depression. So that's the thing. It's where is that line for you might be different than me, than someone else. And that's kind of why this is not so simple, but it doesn't mean it's not conquerable.
As a parent, what do you think is your biggest fear, maybe hearing how social media, and we've seen this rise in 2012 and it impacted depression?
My fear is that social media gives you a sense, literally in the name, of being social, which connotes positive things like, a date, a party, a hangout with friends. And it kind of does feel like that. You're sharing photos, you're sharing ideas, songs, dances, you're expressing yourself, whatever you're doing and however you're using it for. And I'm assuming we're talking about people who go there for collaborative reasons, not to troll people, right? So, however, what they were finding in the data, and what I'm afraid of, I guess, or what I caution, is what is it replacing? And how much of your sort of real world life does it replace for those behaviors that are just sort of not really thought about? They're natural, whether they be taking a walk in the woods, or if you have that nearby, or just riding your bicycle, if that's something you're into, or playing sports, or, sitting down and having a meal with your family or your friends. Everyone's home life is different. Not everyone has a really great home life and good family interaction. So for everyone, it's different. But hopefully most people have one person that they can actually be with in the real world. And if not, social media can help with that. But for the most part, one of the areas where it seems to be really dramatically affecting on the negative is where the majority of the free time, the socializing, is actually online and digital and not in the real world, if you will. And that when that becomes more, then that's actually where the rise in anxiety and depression comes. So they're actually correlated. It's not necessarily one exactly causes the other, and the last thing I'll say is, there was many studies. One of them specifically had people quit social media. Specifically, I think it was an Instagram study for 2 weeks before of a midterm election. And then they surveyed, of course, the folks about their mood and their feelings about the world and everything before the study. And then they had the 2-week break. And after that 2-week break, there were all of these indicators that their mood had increased. They had more positive outlook. Many of them had taken up projects or hobbies that they hadn't in a long time. Many of them, most everyone said they had strengthened their interpersonal relationships. And, it's sort of like, well, yeah, duh, social media is bad. I mean, that it's more than that, though. So it's finding that balance where it's not necessarily dominating all of your free time is probably step one.
Exactly. And to your point of when people disconnected from social media before the election, how it impacted their mood, social media can be so great because of the news and being able to keep us connected. Because I don't know many young people who actually turn on the news. I don't know anyone in my generation who actually sits in front of the TV and turns on CNN or Fox or whatever news channels there are. Instead, they're scrolling on social media and finding out what's happening in the world. So it can be really great to stay in touch and informed and not be ignorant toward what is happening. However, when you open Twitter, for example, and all you see is everything bad that's happening in the world, and you're scrolling and people are fighting, it can be very detrimental and depressing. I know when I open Twitter, I'm definitely not in as good of a mood when I close it. I'm like, wow, someone's being indicted, someone's in war, people are being canceled. I mean, it's nonstop 24/7. And because everyone is taking opposing stands now, it's hard to figure out what is right, what is true, what is not true, and where the middle lines are and what you should believe. And it makes me personally question my beliefs sometimes because I'm not 100% sure who's right. And there's so much opposing information out there. It can be really hard. And not to say that social media is completely toxic for everyone and damaging for everyone, but it can be difficult to know who you are in the midst of all this opposition.
Yeah, and a lot of this is happening when you're alone, right? And so to be clear also, like aloneness isn't the same as loneliness, and loneliness isn't the same as depression. But the more alone, especially with smartphone use you are, and the more loneliness from like school closing or just not having those social experiences, those combine to push up sadness, right? And so that's that's an introvert or extrovert. That's, any ethnicity, any gender, any proclivity. It's really the same. That's sort of a universal human condition. And then at the same time, as you said, the world is stressful and there's more news than ever at your fingertips. And whether you get your news from Twitter or TikTok or Fox or NBC or Reuters or whatever it is, right? It's unfortunately overwhelmingly negative, and negative sensational news is what makes news. So the news, whether it's mainstream or even small side ones, they are incentivized to make sensational headlines and draw attention to all the horrific, terrible things, because part of that is the stopping power of going, oh, wow, what is that? Right? Then you're a reader, you're engaged, they've done their job. That's the news. It could be as unbiased as possible. That doesn't mean it's still negative. However, most of us want to be relatively informed. So it's going back to the thing about balance, right? So I'm not necessarily personally advocating, don't look at the news ever because it's going to make you upset. Okay. Well, we can talk about, what you can do about that in just a minute. But I also want to say something about the way that there's a difference in the way our brains are developed in different parts in life stages. And when we are younger, a lot of times these external stress forces are unconsciously taken within ourselves. So for example, you internalize that stress in a different way when you're younger, because you're still in an input phase, just like as young children are learning language and looking at their parents and how they speak to form their own language and how they speak and how they look at the world. It's the same, and it continues through young adulthood. It's around 24 that starts to kind of shift. So you're basically taking in fear, trauma, stress, hopelessness on a daily basis from the world around you. And it goes inside and your brain starts to process that as this is what real is. This is what life is. And that's sort of automatic. So it's a part just sort of recognizing that and catching that as maybe one little part of that. And we have, an amazing thing that's happening. I feel that, Gen X and Gen Z and Gen Alpha and millennials are actually talking about finances and climate change and pandemics and all of these things, but they're trying to affect change, with activism and caring about things that maybe years ago, quite frankly, I didn't really think about elections and politics until I was able to vote. And even then, I kind of just knew a little bit about the candidates because it wasn't something that was what my peers did, or even was something I had access to the information. So it was kind of like we were sheltered from those worries. And it becomes a pile-on effect, right? So we come out of the pandemic, we're in war. Every day there's something else happening, and it kind of gives you this gloomy narrative, which can form how you see the world. And that's really important to recognize, that you're not imagining it, but it's also not the only way to see the world.
That is so powerful, that this is forming how we view the world. a lot of people are growing up thinking the world is just dangerous and out to get them and hates them and working against them. And it may be true in some aspects that there may be people who are working against you, who are mean, who have so much hate. However, that's not the entire world. There are so many people, so many groups fighting for you, who believe in you, who support you. So recognizing that and changing that mindset that not everything is always going to be bad, that there is some bad, but there's also some good. And being able to find that balance and recognize it can change that perspective of kind of just utter sadness and defeat at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, that kind of, I think, leads into the fourth area, which has to do with modern parenting and how it's changed. And again, it's coming from a place of love and sort of this child first idea. As a Gen Xer, I'll say that it wasn't common for parents to ask their kids how they're feeling or to be in tune with that, or that even being sort of a conversation that was had. It was very rare. It was often marginalized or made fun of or called like, that's what hippies do and that kind of thing. It was really, I'm the parent, listen to me, do what I say, do a good job or else, don't get in trouble, don't do this or else, that kind of thing. And I'm not judging that. I'm just saying that was sort of the cultural norm. And it's now evolved a little bit where there is almost a hyper focus on parenting in such a way that your child is protected from all the harms in the world, the child in the bubble. And this anxiousness about the world that started to be magnified with the internet when there's more access to information and more access to that gloom and doom news, that they started to want to protect. There's also, resource constraints that start to come out in terms of getting into certain schools, whether they be private schools in lower education or in college. More people than ever are going to universities, and there aren't necessarily those exponential number of more spots. So the same college application process for any kind of school, whether it's an Ivy League school, a state school, even community colleges, right? You have more people trying, just volume trying to go. So it gets more competitive. So you have, especially among the middle class and the upper middle class, a big effort from it's again sort of been in comedy, sometimes even before they're born, of this competitive, my kid has to be the best and I want to remove all the obstacles for them. But what that actually does oftentimes is take away their ability to develop resilience and to work through problems and have failures and accept them and learn from them. And so again, it comes from a place of love, but actually it's kind of crippling in some ways what their kids can actually take on, because you can't shelter them from the world and their experience and their feelings.
Absolutely. When it comes to sheltering, my parents are definitely guilty of that. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch Nickelodeon. So it is about protecting, about making sure that we have every opportunity available to us. My dad and my mom will do anything to make sure that my brother and I are prepared for life and that we have resources at our disposal. But it can also be very hard for us to grow and to learn and to be okay with failure. My biggest fear is failing because I never had to as a child. I never had to worry. If I was struggling in a class, I had a private tutor. If I needed help and support in one area, there was a coach there. There was always someone there. My parents always stepped in before I could fail. And to this day, they will always do that. However, now it's terrifying to me. I take an exam and I am crying hysterically because I don't want to fail. What if I fail and it's my fault? No one else could save me. No one could step in. So although wanting to give your kid every opportunity in the world and protect them from all the bad, all the problems, all the obstacles, it can be very detrimental to our mental health because resiliency toward failing is just not there.
Yeah. And that, so that's huge. And sort of layered within that your parents may or may not be feeling is an anxiousness themselves, right? So they have their anxiousness about all the things that could happen to their precious child. And in that, while they try and insulate you from these dangers, right, they're actually transferring that anxiety to the kids. Not your parents specifically, but in general, right? So that's another thing that, again, not intentional, it's almost subconscious, but there's that. And the other thing, and I say this respectfully, in some ways, another area about that's affecting the ability to handle resilience is, in some ways, young people are actually growing up a little bit more slowly. And then at the same time, and I should say why, because, they're maybe less likely to drive. And that's, again, statistics, get a job or a summer job, have chores. So essentially, in some ways, they are not given responsibility. It's taken away because they're like, just focus on school. And school is important because school means college, and college means a job, and job means money, and money means a house, and whatever those things mean. And that's the only way forward, which for a lot of people is not their hopes and dreams and wants. But then they feel like, well, I have to do that. And if I might not, and it's so competitive, that's that cycle, right? But it's not the easy thing to say. And often, and sorry to not throw a generation under the bus, but I often find this quoted in those who are 55 plus, that, kids are just lazy these days. Well, that's really, really a cop out and not fair, because for example, homework on average is actually more kids spend more time doing homework. And again, it's a combination of self-reported, but also from educators to say that they're doing those things. So, washing dishes doesn't also magically take away your anxiety either, or having a job, but having a job early on, or driving and getting yourself to and from places and feeding yourself and doing your laundry, they give you two important things. They give you an ability to tolerate uncomfortable situations and scary situations. Maybe they're small, maybe they're a stop sign that you have to, a four-way stop that you have to navigate, but they kind of give you that skill in small little ways to push through those uncomfortable or nervous situations, and then remind yourself, hey, I could do more than I think I can. Right. And so that's that personal confidence that we all need. And that's one of the building blocks of resilience. And that kind of unfortunately gets taken away.
I completely agree. And again, not to say that parents are taking away their kids' resiliency and not being supportive, but it's unconscious, it's subconscious. It's just wanting to give your kid the best. Yep. And being able to realize that it's okay to want to give your kid all the best opportunities and all the best resources, to want them to go to the top school so that they can get the top job and they can become someone, but also being able to listen to them and see if that's what they want for themselves, helping them figure out who they want to be. You might want your kid to be a doctor or a lawyer. They might not want that for themselves, and that's okay, but listening and supporting them through it can be so helpful to their mental health, because they're not working against their parents now. They're not feeling ashamed of who they are and why they're not living up to their parents' expectations. I know a lot, I get a comment that you should be a lawyer, or that my nonprofit's not necessarily a real job. I'm not saying that comes specifically from my parents, but it can come from peers, it can come from grandparents, it can come from cousins, siblings. But recognizing that you can't be discounting kids and taking away who they want to be, how they identify, and instead just listening and working together to learn from them and guide them into making a decision that's right for them and for you as a family.
Yeah. And sort of related to that is the other sort of sometimes unconscious behavior that is coming from a place of love and support that actually can cause young people to not develop some of those resilient skills, is being super accommodating. So we were talking about shutting out all the bad stimulus is one way, right? The world is bad and scary. I'm going to put walls around my kid. Another thing is, being overly accommodating. So one example that I shared with you was, if your child is afraid of dogs, maybe they got bit or got chased one time. So then they're like, well, they're afraid of dogs. So every time there's a dog, we'll be like, they're afraid of dogs. And you reinforce that, and you don't go to the friend's house that has the dogs. Or if the kid said, I don't like that vegetable, you're like, they don't like that. They won't eat anything but chicken nuggets. And then you just kind of reinforce that. Well, those behaviors, of course, come from love. But if you don't learn how to release like negative emotions in stress, if you don't figure out to do that, that's what leads to severe anxiety. And so another way to approach that, for example, with the dog situation would be maybe to find a safe you test it out way with exposing the child to some puppies or some dogs that are small and really friendly, like small in terms of their stature, so they don't have the physical intimidation. And they build up their resilience and say, oh, I'm not afraid of all dogs. That one dog that one time wasn't a very nice dog. Sometimes people are like that. Sometimes dogs are like that. But here we go. Same thing with the vegetables. Maybe you start with those foods where the vegetables are sort of hidden in the food, and you over time, build it up. It's not a one and done and a one-time thing, but it's not necessarily about keeping the child in a box and keeping them away from any stressors, news about the world, exposures to sex, drugs, and violence. They're going to see it anyway. They're going to leave your home. And so kind of finding that balance. And that's what all of these things are about. It's getting away from these generalizations that don't really help anyone on either side.
Exactly. And I really want to bring the point of it's not too late to change. It's not too late to start adapting behaviors. I think that a lot of people believe that an old dog can't learn new tricks.
Right.
That, well, I've been doing it this far and they seem fine, so I'm not going to change anything, or I can't change now. But just small behaviors. I can say for my parents now, my father helps support me in ways that I can work on my nonprofit and build it up, but also giving me responsibility and starting to say, as you begin to make more money, you're going to start taking over these bills. But if you can't cover it, I'm still here. However, let's start working more toward independence. My mom will sit with me for hours and help me organize a binder if I need it. So they're still there. They're guiding me, giving me tools, but giving me more independence, allowing me to start to learn and to grow. And maybe they do take away that piece of failure, which definitely helps alleviate my anxiety, but also knowing that it's okay to fail and kind of giving me that pep talk that I'm going to fail eventually. I may have made it this far without failing, but eventually you can't get an A in every class. Eventually you can't pass every test, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And sharing their own failures too. That's the other thing about the perfect parent thing, and the because I said so, and sort of being a little bit more human in yourself. And knowing that, even the Harvard graduates will tell you that when they applied, nobody asked them for their third grade transcript. Like some things are okay and you go past them, and in the scope of your life, they don't really matter anymore. And it's just the experience. And, I want to balance the thing I said about the kids, about young people not growing up as quickly. And that was in terms of things like certain areas of responsibility, like driving and jobs and independence. But in other ways, the younger generations, yours and Gen Alpha, are growing up a lot faster because of that news that we talked about and what you're exposed to. So, the bullying, like you said, the threatening, the conversations about mental health even coming to the surface, knowing someone who tried to harm themselves, the global problems that are in the news, active shooters drills and school shootings, and all the things that you have to think about that are incredibly intense and overwhelming at a very young age. Kindergartners hiding under their desk for an active shooter. It's, as a parent, it's heartbreaking. And I don't want to get emotional, but it's heartbreaking that those concepts have to be taught. And what does that mean? Somebody might want to kill me. You know what I mean? Like when you're 5, like we didn't have to think about those things. So it's kind of this weird thing where in some ways the growth and development and maturity is thwarted, and in other ways it's extremely accelerated, and you're still one person navigating this world.
Exactly.
So like there's some, we talked about a lot of things that can help, and for everyone they look very different. And some of the basic simple things that can kind of work for anyone, regardless of your socioeconomic status, of your race, gender, creed, orientation, is called support mapping. And it's basically a way to actually, write down, because sometimes when you write it, you commit and you memorize it and you connect with it better, but to write down in some way, and it could be or text down or copy down or draw, however works for you, but essentially to commit to some lasting source, a little map, a little bit that helps you identify like what people, places and spaces are supportive to you. And it doesn't have to be in any way a kind of a therapist or a parent or even a friend. It could be someone that casually, like someone, if you have, your nails done, or if you go and you have a trainer for your sports or whatever it may be, someone that you felt was kind and genuine. that could be your support network person. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to just open a vein and tell them everything about every problem that you have. But it does mean that it's a reminder that they make you feel good and that you matter. And that's why it's worth trying one more nudge, today. And then maybe one more nudge tomorrow. When you don't feel it, maybe you reach out to them. Maybe you pop in and say hi. Another place for many people is school, regardless of if you feel that you are popular or unpopular or have a million friends or have no friends or have one friend. Schools are packed with resources to help. I mean, they are motivated, they are measured and evaluated on how well they get young people through their halls to graduation of whatever age, whether we're talking 6th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, because now everything is graduation between all the schools, or collegiate, right? So there's a lot of points of contact. There's a lot of socialized people, and even a lot of the service people are trained in a lot of socio and psychosocial things that you wouldn't expect, down to custodians and cafeteria workers and things like that. So really, it can be anyone that's in your support network. And I'm sure if everyone is really honest with themselves, they can find one person that one time gave them a smile or an attaboy or something of encouragement that made them feel like that. And so that's kind of where you need to start. And remember that feeling that it gave you and start with that.
That is incredible advice, because we often, when we're struggling, I know my experience, feel so alone and like no one's going to understand and there's no one we can talk to, and we isolate ourselves. And knowing that there really is someone out there. There really is someone you can call, that you can text, that you can send a message to, that you can sit down and talk to. And it took me a long time to realize that and to be okay with it, because sometimes we feel like a burden. Sometimes we feel like maybe we're being dramatic and someone doesn't want to hear what we're going through. But Natanya, if I called you and I was having a bad day and I was like, I need someone to talk to, would you feel like that's a burden, or would you be willing to sit and listen?
Well, I mean, I think you know the answer. I would be willing to listen and, happy and honored and so excited that you reached out, because I know that just the fact of reaching out means you didn't go inward. And that is huge. And that's why I'm saying, sometimes it's within your family, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's people that you know well, and sometimes it's not. And none of those labels matter at all. And there are, to be really clear here, because again, your viewership is a very mixed group. There are many free resources out in the world for physical in-person places, as well as online and free chat, opportunities for you, that if you really, really feel that you have nobody, there are places to do that. And if at the end, or, as a follow-up, we can share those, right? Because I want to make sure that the first impulse isn't, well, I don't have that, so the end, I'm done. And just to make sure that's said. But, there's a couple things that, again, they're sort of cliched and corny, but they're shown to work, some things that all of us can do. And I just want to say, all of this resilience talk and empowerment is kind of like any other training, any other muscle development. And it's not going to just stay there because you did it the one time, right? You don't go to the regular gym if you're that kind of person who does that and you get in shape, right? And you get in shape and you say, okay, I'm in shape now. The end, I'm done, and it doesn't work like that. That doesn't mean you don't get to take days off. It doesn't mean sometimes you don't eat cake. It means that, it's a balance, but it's something you have to work at. So there's some easy other things I just wanted to bring up really quick besides the support network that you can do for within yourself. And again, you can do them all, you can do some, you can do none, but most importantly, it's just to do it and maybe try something different so that you feel like there are things that you do that don't feel like effort. Right? So one of the obvious ones is reading, and reading is not for everyone. So reading, or I should say, or listening to audiobooks or watching YouTubes that are around, for lack of a better word, self-help. So they may be by clinicians, therapists, empowerment coaches. It doesn't really matter. As long as there's a positive message that you find some piece that resonates with you, that's worth it. Keep doing it. Maybe it's Fran's workbook. We need to take the tools into our lives and try. And maybe you don't pick it up every day, but every little bit that you expose yourself to actually affects this electric box into thinking that those things are important. And it will help reinforce the undercurrent, the language that's sort of behind your consciousness around who am I, what matters, what's important, what can I do? Another area that, again, just a few generations ago, especially in the Western culture in the US, meditating. So meditating, most people that I've talked to about it say, especially if they're older than you, Fran, and some of your listeners, it doesn't work for me. I can't do that because they think meditating means you sit quietly for hours and you don't have any thoughts. Well, it's not that. Meditating could be a few minutes of breathing exercises where you just close your eyes and shut out the world for a few seconds. It's as long as you need it to be. But doing that reset, being sort of present in the moment, even a few minutes a day, best advice, if it can be, right when you wake up, that time right between when you're sort of sleeping and awake, before you look at your phone, before you do anything like that, and just give your body a moment to kind of come together and remind yourself, give yourself a mantra, a statement, a corny thing that you might not want to say out loud to anyone, but your own cheerleader statement, if you will. And that's a great way to do that. And if you can do that every day, there are clinical studies that show that actually can affect mood and health, right? And even your cellular health. Listen to people like you, Fran, powerful speakers, people who motivate you, who make you feel like, wow, I can do anything now. People who have triumphed through adversities and trials and failures and feeling less than, and see that it is possible, and not to look at them and be jealous or envious or angry because they have pulled through, and rather take in the fact that they've struggled too. And they probably still struggle every day to get through those things. And a few more things are, again, sort of cliched and hackneyed, but have been shown clinically to really help. Journaling. And that journaling, of course, can be by writing things down, but also it can be audio journaling. Of course, I'm a little biased there because my startup, Evermore, is an audio journal built exactly for these reasons, such that you can make it so simply effort. You just press a button and start talking and just let it flow. Don't censor yourself. Let it out. And you might find yourself processing feelings in ways and looking at yourself and your place in the world a little differently just by letting out that stream of consciousness on how you're feeling and thinking and doing and checking in with yourself. Make a gratitude list. I do this with my young children every day, and it used to be a bit of a chore, admittedly. I started it, honestly, only in COVID, in lockdown. I saw a thing for these gratitude journals and I had them, but I didn't open them. And then I was like, okay, we need something to help buoy. These kids are scared. They were 5 years old and couldn't see their friends, and people are dying. And what does it mean? And how do we have those difficult conversations? And looking to help build their resilience and positivity at that time. And so we started, and again, these are young children, but it's really the same exercise for adults as well. When you take a moment to be grateful for the basic, simple things like existing, like any people are in your life, having food to eat, having a roof over your head, depending on where you're at, there is always something to be grateful for. Some people have more things than other people, and some people don't even appreciate who have all the things. So it's not about that kind of trappings of success gratitude. It's more about, I'm grateful that I can breathe here right now. I'm grateful that, well, sorry to say something really terrible, but that I didn't go through or I wasn't successful in my suicide attempt but I learned from it. I'm grateful that I can take from that and help make change and maybe help somebody else. So whatever the gratitude may be for yourself, it's not for anyone's eyes or judgment. It's only for yourself. Again, it's been studied that doing that little exercise every day, 1 or 2 things, maybe 5 things, actually can help you reappreciate, reconnect, and be less affected by the negative stuff that's going to happen. It's going to hit you. And, the last couple things are, again, with the listening to the speakers or reading biographies, like looking to people who you admire and respect that make you feel like, wow, and not necessarily putting yourself up to try and compete or compare, but just to say that, do you see what's possible? People who have risen through poverty, abuse, and all of those things and come out the other side. That means that you can too. It really does. It's that simple. It doesn't mean you can today. It doesn't mean you're going to feel like you can today, but it does mean that it's going to start to imprint on your mind that is possible, to give you that little bit of buoy when you're going through on your own challenge.
These are amazing tools that we can do, and they're all things we can do without other people. And that's one of the most important things that I would love to emphasize. Because when we feel like we don't have anyone to talk to, when we feel like we're calling people, they're not answering the phone, when we're just not sure where to go, when we feel isolated, there are things we can do with ourselves. There are places we can start within us just us. If you have a phone, putting on a podcast, a meditation app, just closing your eyes and breathing, grabbing a piece of paper and writing things down, creating affirmations, maybe putting it on a sticky note and putting it on your mirror. There are small things that we can do for us, by ourselves, without someone else, that can really, really help us. These are amazing tools. And as a parent, when you made that gratitude list with your kids, what was it like in the beginning? Was there any resistance from the kids? Did it take time to work together? Or was it just kind of automatic?
Well, I've been the kind of parent that, because I work with nonprofits and charitable works, I have exposed all of my children early on to giving, right? And being sort of aware of all the privilege that we have. And so within my family, it wasn't such a difficult leap, but they were, especially my younger children, were 5, right? So understanding how the food gets from the source to our home and appreciating what that means, or how emergency responders work and all of those things. We had to kind of talk about the world and how it works a little bit for them to fully understand all the levels of gratitude that they could express and feel. But they did have, sort of a baseline, because we're sort of a family that's very involved in charitable works on a daily basis. But after the first or third day, okay, maybe a week, so this is a daily thing. They have these journals every single day. Some days they would just write our names on it, of the people in the family, right? And then I would be like, no, you have to think of something else. Like, stop writing mommy, or the same thing, food, and talking about what are different ways to find gratitude in sort of those small, tiny little things, and sometimes the bigger things in the world. So yeah, it's not a perfect system, and I'm pretty meticulous about it. It's actually the one thing that they have to do every day. Has there been 1 or 2 days that we've stopped? Sure. But do we go back? And I say, now we forgot yesterday, we have to do yesterday? Absolutely. And so the gratitude books for 2020 got filled. And one of the things that was great is we started the new year, 21 and now 22, each time with a new book that they actually have now, they really like to go back and read and look at what they are, because they're younger. Some of the things are very innocent, sweet things. Like, they're happy that they saw a fox in the yard, and they're grateful for, this carrot that grew on the plants that we started doing because of COVID. Everyone started gardening, right? Or, they're really small things. And then they're like, I remember that. Or they got to see some friend or family member for the first time in a long time. And so they're very, very small little things, and their faces light up in rereading it. And that is that pure joy. I try and take that into myself when I'm having a tough time, because that's, the amazing thing about young kids. And that's what, I hope all of us can kind of re-tap into. And, what you said about doing it on your own is really important. And that's why I wanted to kind of separate the support network idea from some of these things that you can do as an individual. And there are other things, not just gratitude. Maybe you're not even ready to be there yet, because you just are still in the darkest place. Things like listening to music, moving your body, like literally moving your body. And I don't mean exercise like it has to be at a gym. I mean, by yourself alone in a space of like 2 by 2, you can actually do a lot of movement. That actually helps your brain and stimulates positive chemicals to be released. So you can kind of trick that electrical box to be a little more positive. And again, I just want to also be clear, for those people who have been recommended or are taking medication, this is not to say that's bad or wrong or doesn't work or doesn't help. Really, that's kind of a separate thing that for an individual might be the thing that they need. So these are just supplemental things that anybody can do and work for all people. And I just want to also make that disclaimer.
Thank you for making that disclaimer, because I think a lot of people, when someone talks about things you can do for yourself, they think, well, they're against medication, and it's either medication or it's self-help and it's doing things for myself. And they really work the best together. And if you need medication, you've worked with a doctor and you found that's the best option for you, like I have with myself, knowing that there's other things you can do as well, that you don't have to rely on just one thing. And Natanya, you've been absolutely amazing, tying it back to what we said in the beginning, that the world can be a very scary place with all the access to information that we have, and our minds can grow up feeling this gloom. But doing small things like that gratitude journal, like listening to podcasts or music or things that make you smile, breathing exercises, these are all ways that we can help combat that fear that so many of us are developing. Before we wrap up, what is one last piece of advice that you want to share?
Okay, I guess it's that, success is your own definition, and it's not static. It's not one place and one point in time. And most people don't arrive at it in one day or arrive at it and then say, okay, I'm done now. I have my success of whatever you've defined it, right? It's a way of being. It's, it's part of building that resilience and adapting and growing. And it gets easier. I hope this one thing comes across. It really does get easier the more you practice. And if you want to be resilient and stay resilient, you're going to have that sort of workout, just like the gym, kind of going on in place, right? You're going to have to be a bit diligent about it, especially when you don't feel like it. And then through that will come some more confidence. And that confidence is a strength. And it's not something that you need to acquire because it's already inside you. It is you. The fact that you're here today is part of it. You're actually born with all the confidence and self-esteem that you need, right? Like little kids, they think they can do anything. And then we start to lose that, right? So you kind of want to tap into that early stage. I can be anything. I want to be a fireman or a fire truck or whatever little kids say that they want. And they believe that they can. And they don't think about the fact of, well, I'm a girl or my mom wants me to be a doctor or a lawyer. They just think I like fire trucks and I like putting out fires. So great. Whatever that is, that energy behind that, that's what you want to tap into, right? And kind of catching yourself when you are in those negative self-talk moments, right? So not, I can't, I'm not, I screwed up, but sort of like, well, I learned this, or that was a teaching moment, and kind of reframing your language and how you see those sort of failures as teachable moments for yourself to build upon, or what you want to do differently next time. And kind of like take away a lot of that fear and judgment and doubt and take them away as a truth. They're just a mental construct of how you see the situation. So basically, you're perfect the way you are, right? You're you. There's no wrong way to be you. And if you're trying to be somebody else, you're going to have a hard time because that's not you. So, take a deep breath, clear your mind, and just recognize that you are here for a reason, all of us, and we are better together.
There you have it. Amazing advice from Dr. Natanya Wachtel. You have been absolutely amazing today. How can people learn more about your app, Evermore?
Well, it's available in the App Store. It's EVRMORE. And you can, I'm on social media. There are ways to get in touch. I'm happy. We also have a lot of programs for young people to get involved with our app because we're in early stages of launch to give feedback, create content, all kinds of things. So if you want to learn more or get involved in ways to help other people or just learn about yourself, we can probably share contact information, and I'm happy to receive you.